And then you have the notorious Islam map, put all Muslim organizations and institutions on a map,
Okay.
including private addresses of some people. Every time they tried to ban the hijab, the Constitutional Court ended up breaking that ban. This time they were targeting girls who are under the age of 14, also teachers.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum Nahal, how are you doing? Nehal,
Alaikum
sorry.
salam. Alaikum salam. I'm all right, alhamdulillah. How are you?
I'm good as well. Thank you very much. So, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Nehal. I am from Austria. I was born and I grew up here. I studied political science, and I am currently coordinating CAGE Austria. And
Okay.
I work at CAGE International, so it's kind of like a double role.
Mm-hmm. So, can you briefly tell us a little bit about Cage? So, for people who don't know.
Mhm. So basically, what CAGE Austria does is kind of similar to what CAGE International does, but within the Austrian context. So on the one hand, my work here is kind of divided between two aspects. On the one hand, what I do is I monitor state-led Islamophobia, and we also challenge state-led Islamophobia. And on the other hand, what we try to do is to empower the Muslim community and to also support them to the point where we can see them actually challenge state-led Islamophobia themselves.
Okay. You said so the Austrian state is challenging Muslims. So, can you tell us how does it challenge you? What kind of discrimination does it pass towards Muslims, or how does it discriminate towards Muslims? How does Austrian state discriminate towards Muslims?
So let me maybe give you an example of a
Mm-hmm.
case quite close to our origin story and how we became Cage Austria. So it's called Operation Luxor. These were raids that happened in November 2020, on the 9th of November to be particular, that were the largest ever police raid since World War II. And it involved around 930 officials. And 5 a.m. in the morning, the police kind of broke into and violently raided the houses of 70 Muslim homes. They across multiple states. So this happened in November 2020. And a friend of mine who used to do this work before me, she used to do an internship at Cage. And she told them about what had happened, and they agreed to help or support the community here in responding to these raids. So, what we basically did is we started out as Act P. That was an initiative that was um, a grassroots initiative where ACT is an acronym, and it stands for Assisting Children Traumatized by Police.
So they were
Because
targeting children or families.
exactly, families. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they're targeting people like men. It was mainly men. There were a couple of women who were also amongst the accused. But at the end of the day, these are homes where men live with their wives and with their children. And this whole operation was done under the pretext of fighting or let me put it that way, the survivors of Operation Luxor were accused of on the one hand, financing terrorism and being a member of a terrorist organization. Um, I think these were the two main accusations, right? And it targeted mainly the Arab, Egyptian community and the
Mm-hmm.
Palestinian community.
Okay.
So when we
But
talk,
isn't it exactly during the COVID period when there you had like lockdowns?
exactly, yes, I will come
And
to it.
and okay.
So it wasn't only during COVID. Actually, a week earlier, um, two important things happened. So the 2nd of November attack happened, and we went into another lockdown just a week ago. So when we talked to the survivors, we found out that children were actually very, very harshly criminalized by the police and treated by the police. There were several children that were part or were targeted by the police within these operations. We know of very humiliating treatment of the children. In some cases, they were not allowed to go to the bathroom and close the door. They had to go to the bathroom with an open door. In some cases, the police actually pointed guns at the children. But also, we know that their items and their devices were confiscated, even though they were not amongst the accused. So when we first started, we thought, um, well, inherently, whatever happens, whatever the parents might have done or not done, the children are always innocent. They are children, right? So we thought the first thing that we need to do to kind of bring attention onto this issue is to highlight the fact that the children were actually victimized by this operation. So we talked to many organizations in Austria that deal with, children's rights, etc. But we realized that no one would want to touch this case as long as it's brandmarked as something related to terrorism.
Hmm.
So the children, they were basically not wanting to even get involved in the rights of the children just because of the terrorism issue that was looming around the case. So you know that their devices were illegally confiscated, and we were in a lockdown time, so it means they needed their devices to actually be able to participate in school and in university. So they had to kind of, you know, they were put in a
Solitary confinement.
exactly in like and also in a difficult position where they had to explain to their teachers why they don't have any laptops anymore, right?
Hmm.
Also the accounts of their fathers, who are in many of the cases the providers in the families, were frozen. So we know of cases where some people told us they weren't even able to kind of do basic runs to the store to buy like food. Um,
So these are 70 houses, and why particularly, you said something happened in 2nd of November. What exactly happened in 2nd of November, and why targeting Egyptian and Palestinians particularly?
So the 2nd of November, we had the Vienna attack, right?
Okay.
And when they did Operation Luxor, actually, the Interior Minister then, who used to be our Chancellor, Nehammer, said that this was a like an action that they did, or an important action in fighting political Islam. And they made it seem like the people, their homes they have raided, had something to do with the 2nd of November attack.
Hmm.
So basically, they used the 2nd of November attack as a
An
way,
excuse.
as an excuse. But what we actually know now is the 2nd of November attack happened because the security services and the intelligence services were too busy planning for an illegitimate raids targeting Muslims, and they were not attentive to an actual threat, if that makes sense. Um, so that is why the 2nd of November was so significant, because it made everyone think that this had something to do with it, and people just stayed silent on the issue. What was your other question? I forgot about it.
Um, one was what happened in second of why particularly targeting Egyptians and Palestinians?
Um,
You said these are the two groups that they targeted
yeah.
particularly, so
So
why?
because we know that there was very strong foreign influence. And that foreign influence came from countries like Egypt and the UAE. And these both countries have and arguably also Israel, and these countries have vested interest in targeting what they perceive to be the Muslim Brotherhood in the West.
Hmm.
So one way to explain this is, I don't know if you've heard about the Abu Dhabi scandal.
Alps.
Alps, exactly.
Hmm.
So basically, Vidino, who is one of the main intellectual, like if you want to call it intellectual actors or players who used to write all of these reports on the Muslim Brotherhood in Europe, he was actually paid by the Austrian state to write a report on the Muslim Brotherhood in Austria.
In a
And that,
negative way.
exactly.
Slanders
Basically,
and stuff. Okay.
just, yeah, basically to just monitor and surveil them within that report and to like pin the fingers about who he believes is Muslim Brotherhood or not. And that report was actually used, amongst others, as an ideological background for these raids.
Hmm.
And that report was partially um, financed by the Austrian state, right? So that is one of the evidence that we have, but also the interrogation when the police were interrogating um, um, the um, the survivors. They were asking questions that they felt was like not felt, but they were very similar to how the Egyptian state would understand what Muslim Brotherhood are, like very old questions like, do you wake up at Fajr and in the morning and pray Fajr? These are like Egyptian style, um,
Interrogations. Okay.
interrogation questions. So um, yeah, that
So
is why the Egyptian community and the Palestinian community were targeted,
targeted.
were amongst the most targeted. Just let me continue on the Operation Luxor case because there's
Sure.
like a couple of legal issues that I would like to highlight that are very important. Like
Sure.
for instance, the fact that as Operation Luxor happened 4 years ago, and
Hmm.
as of right now, there was no arrests and no charges. So the
Oh my God.
results are zero. So it just
So are
goes to
these
show
people still incarcerated?
they're not incarcerated. These raids happened and the people walked free because there was basically, I mean, the operation happened on baseless grounds. And what the police thought and what the state thought is going to happen is they are going to raid these people's homes and then they will find all the evidence that they needed. They will find guns and tons of money and plans to take over the world. But then what they realized is that wasn't nothing of that was true.
Hmm.
Um, so basically, it came to no arrest, it came to no charge, nothing. And many of the cases were actually dismissed. A lot of the evidence that were collected were illegal. Two the expert witnesses, Heiko Heinisch and Nina Scholz, who are actually also affiliated with an Islamophobic state project called the Documentation Center Political Islam, were deemed by the court as biased, and also the operation was deemed as politically motivated.
Hmm.
So, and what we find now that even though most of the terrorism-related accusations dropped, we are in what we like to call the Operation Luxor 2.0 phase, where a lot of the survivors are now being prosecuted and targeted for non-terrorism related um, issues like finances, etc., etc. So what we see here is um, like an intended targeting, an intended prosecution of these Muslims, and even from like illegally accumulated data, they are trying to kind of further target the
So as if
survivors.
they're either planting or they are finding excuse to to target Muslims, especially those that were targeted,
Yeah, yeah,
raided. In fact.
exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. So it's not enough that they didn't find any evidence for the prior or the for the initial accusations that they had. Once the terrorism accusation didn't work, they started to go after the survivors for financial reasons, etc., etc. And it's very obvious through the example of Rahma Austria, which is a charity organization in Austria, where their case was dismissed and actually quite early on, if I am not mistaken. And then they were raided last year again. Around 500,000 euros in donation money was confiscated, which the court then decided that this confiscation was not
Permissible.
permissible and they had to pay back the money. But also, what they did is they went as far as to, um, the police went as far as to knock on early morning again on 700 of their donors to ask them whether they know where the money they donate to Rahma Austria goes or not. So, again, using that terrorism kind of accusation,
Narrative. Hmm.
scare away Rahma's support and Rahma's donors.
Is this
So,
by a political party or is it like more the police department or the corporates? Or is it like a public institution or a private institution
no,
that's
it's public. It's the state. It's basically FPÖ and ÖVP politics that I mean the FPÖ and ÖVP when they were in government the second time, they were the ones who actually planted that seed of Operation Luxor. But when it came into execution, it was executed during the ÖVP and the Green coalition in government, right? Um, so yeah, it is definitely a state sponsored.
sponsored. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you talked about the rise of Islamophobia.
So, can you tell us a little bit about what is the reason of rise of Islamophobia in Austria
Mhm.
and in Europe in general? And is it recent or has it been there forever?
I am amongst the people who would argue that Islamophobia is actually inherent to Europe and especially to Austria. And it's part and parcel of our identity and it's part and parcel of our own history, right? Like I might remind you of the idea of the gates of Vienna and how the Austrians beat the Ottomans, and they were the ones who kind of defeated the Muslims and the Turks and stopped a process of
Expansion.
yeah, Islamization, basically. That's what they say of Islamization of the Islamization of Europe, and their own way of kind of negative identifying with Muslims, basically meaning that whatever the Muslims are, they are not, right? So Islamophobia, I think, has always been a very inherent part of what Europe is and especially an very inherent part of what Austria is. But what we're seeing right now is a different manifestation of Islamophobia. So when I grew up in Austria, Islamophobia has always been part of my own story of growing up in
Hmm.
Austria, if you will. But back then, we were the children of most of us were the children of working class people.
Yes.
This is the story of most of the people who, or a large number of the people who came into Austria. So I am a second or first generation. I don't know I think I'm uh, that way. I'd be the first generation a
Hmm.
Muslim born in Austria, right? My parents immigrated here, even though they are not neutralized. I'm the first one to be born here. My parents come from a working class background.
Family.
Um, so the way they dealt with us was very different, and it was mainly through a very securitized integration debate or narrative, um, where
And why recently is it growing even further? Like, was there a, I'm sorry, was there a dip in Islamophobia? Because yes, during the early expansions of Ottoman Empire, you had the Islamophobic. Okay, that's war. But why is there a sudden rise? Like, do you feel that there is a sudden rise? There was a dip for some time, and then there is a sudden rise. Do you
I
feel
don't
like
think
that?
there was no, I don't think there was like I don't think it ever became less. It just Muslims became more. and also the status of Muslims changed. So we were not anymore the children of working class people. We started to go to universities and have an education, and we started to have a different status in Austria. But then also you see from another side, there's the rise of Muslims coming from refugees from Syria and Afghanistan. So Muslims have become more in Austria, which if you become more in Austria and if Muslims have more status in Austria, then inherently the Islamophobia is going to be more apparent.
Hmm.
So there is kind of I would say a link between I'd argue between both, but it's not that Islamophobia is only there when there are Muslims. It as we've have argued before, it is inherent to Europe and to the idea of Europe and how they define themselves.
Okay. And do you feel like do you think there's any connection with economic crisis, European economic crisis? Is Europe doing economically well in general?
I mean, yes. In Austria, we are currently facing like a big budget crisis, right?
Okay.
And that budget crisis attributed to multiple factors, COVID, but also the Ukraine war, but also the mismanagement of the previous government, right? And what the FPÖ tends to do right now is to kind of, I don't like to use the word scapegoat. They kind of are. Um, Muslims and refugees, right? So what they're trying to say is we are going to solve the budget crisis because we are going to take the funds that the refugees illegitimately, under their understanding, take from us, and it will. That is how they try to solve the problem, right? So what they're inherently doing is they are kind of putting two vulnerable groups, white poor people, against poor Muslim people to fight over the resources. And that is, I'd argue, what elitists have done um, around a lot of other countries to have the poor people fight for resources amongst one another and keep them busy with the clash of civilizations and Islam and these people are evil and good and criminality. So nobody looks at who are actually the ones who are responsible for this budget crisis and to not look at the elitists that are actually the winners of this whole situation.
And
And that is
sorry, please go ahead.
I'm just saying that that is the game that is being played right now, right? So,
So, tell us a little bit about FPO. What is FPO? I think you've mentioned FPO quite some time.
mhm,
And how are they targeting Muslims? Like, what kind of? Because I've heard like it's a far right government.
mhm.
So, were they in power before? I think you mentioned that they wanted to enact on it. So, especially with Hubert Click. So I'm not good with the German names, so I'm sorry. Hubert. Let's call him Hubert. So yeah, tell us a little bit about they're coming in power. How are they going to target Muslims?
So FPÖ is the far right. ÖVP is what we originally knew as the center right. I'd argue that they are actually less center as of right now and more right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, they actually were in power before. I think it was the before this one government one before they were in power, and then the coalition ended because of the Ibiza scandal. I don't know if you've heard about it, but basically there was a video recording of the then vice chancellor, who was also the leader of the FPÖ, the far right, where he was kind of having a conversation with someone he assumed to be a Russian oligarch, and they were trying to discuss the privatization of some public institutions or organizations with her. So of course that was like a huge scandal, and what we ended up finding out was that that was actually this woman was not a Russian oligarch, and it was a fake. But it's the idea that they were actually having these discussions with someone they presumed to be a Russian oligarch, and them wanting to basically sell Austria and public yeah and in public institutions to um, rich someone like a rich Russian person. So basically that coalition collapsed, and then we went into um, um, election again, snap elections, and the ÖVP ended up winning under Kurz, Sebastian Kurz, our previous chancellor, and he is also the one of the main faces and orchestrators of the current um, wave of Islamophobia and Islamophobic policies, and he's
Hmm.
one of the most important proponents of that narratives on political Islam and the fight against political Islam. And then they were in power with, and they made a coalition with the Green Party, but he then had to step down from politics due to his own corruption scandals. So the seeds that were planted when the FPÖ and ÖVP were in power, like for instance Operation Luxor, were then executed under ÖVP, which, you know, theoretically they are the center right, but we know they're more right wing, and the Green Party, right?
Hmm.
Um, so when and that is an important factor because it wasn't just Operation Luxor that they ended up enacting. It's not the sole Islamophobic measure. There were a wave of Islamophobic measures that ended up being executed within the reign of the Green Party and the ÖVP, like for instance, the establishment of the Documentation Center, Political Islam, which is a government-funded kind of organization that has its main objective to monitor and surveil Muslims, and they do that by publishing reports on the Muslim community, and they are usually very, very weak reports. But these reports then lay the ideological grounds for legal actions against these communities. And that was an example where they actually published a report on on a mosque community, and the state ended up taking some legal actions against, or at least promise legal actions against them, but also they are playing a big factor in criminalizing the pro-Palestinian solidarity. And then you have the notorious Islam map. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it was a project between the University of Vienna and the Documentation Center Political Islam. It's a digital map that was presented as a measure against against fight like a measure to fight political Islam, where they basically put all Muslim organizations and institutions on a map,
Okay.
including the private addresses of some people, under the guise of fighting political Islam to make Muslims more visible. It's basically they're saying
And is
we are
it
supporting
open
you.
source or is
It's open. It's
it's
still
open
open.
source? Okay.
It's still
Okay.
open. I mean, at least now we know that the court has actually, and that is something that has happened just recently. The courts have said that they cannot publish private addresses. That does not count as academic freedom. They cannot publish private addresses, or I don't remember if it's just about the private addresses, but the addresses in general. And
Have
you
you
had
been, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying that they have put every institution, every organization that
Hmm.
are Muslim or kind of in that area under that map.
And
And
have you
actually,
been a target of any of these, like open source? Have your public data been published?
me not me
Not yet.
personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, alhamdulillah, nothing happens. Inshallah, it
Inshallah.
stays that way. Inshallah, it stays that way. Yes.
I mean, the Islam map, no.
Hmm.
As of now, we have not been targeted by the Islam map, but it also has to do with the fact that how we organize ourselves here. We try to do our best to kind of protect ourselves from state censorship,
Hmm.
um, which is why we don't, for instance, take any kind of state funding. So we are completely independent because we don't want the state to either control what we do nor kind of challenge our existence, right?
Hmm.
So that is like the Islam map was one of those. And then we have the Vienna Forum, for instance, which is an international conference that it was hosted every year since 2021. So it was hosted in 2021, 22, 23, and in 24 it wasn't. So this year it wasn't hosted. But it's an international conference that is led by Susanne Raab, which was the Minister of Integration. So basically, it's this international conference where at some point, I think there were 10 to 11 EU countries that were represented, where they are discussing basically the Muslim question. And they were giving platform or discussing Islamophobic policies as best practice examples, right? So, like for instance, the ghetto policies in Denmark, they were seen as, oh, that is a best practice that we need to also do in Austria. And actually, Susanne Raab was at some point actually going that path of establishing ghetto policies in Austria. We could see that there were some initial evidence to suggest that, and including stuff that they said and did.
Hmm.
Um, but also the French example of separatism and separatist laws were
Yes.
also discussed as best practice example. And actually, when you think about it, the Vienna Forum mirrors the FPÖ's idea of Fortress Europe, right? To just or Fortress Austria, to kind of have Austria be that fortress. It's where no one or they can decide who comes in and who comes out. It's just a different understanding of borders, whereas the FPÖ might have a very strict classical understanding of a geographical border, a line, you don't cross, you go out. And the Vienna Forum is more of a neoliberal project, so their understanding of borders is a bit different. Not to say that they don't give space to the idea of a geographical border, because they do. And I feel like inviting, for instance, Greek or Greek representative and giving them so much space is also a symbolism of that Greek playing a big role in, refugees coming into Europe. But their understanding is also an ideological border, a cultural border, a value type of border, right? And they're discussing these questions from a security perspective. So a strong securitization of Islam and Muslims in Europe. And as I said, like in my opinion, this project kind of also mirrors FPÖ type of projects of
Hmm.
for Europe and stuff.
Whether that's left or right, they're both targeting on Muslims
Exactly.
by having these borders, fortresses, like you said, and it can be, like you said, maybe segregating communities and ghettoization of Muslim areas. Oh, okay, that brings it reminds you of something, right? Warsaw ghettos. Remember Warsaw ghettos?
Exactly. It does. I mean, because we also were discussing about how the FPÖ kind of will impact Muslims. It's as we have said that uh, whether it's from the left or whether it's from the right, I think the goal is similar, but the mechanisms that are used are different. So under an FPÖ and with a peer rule, which is very, very likely our next government going to be, we will see more banning. So they have already, and that is actually interesting because, as you know, we had elections in September
Hmm.
and the FPÖ ended up being victorious. They were the party with the most votes. And
But
then,
then because of coalition, there was some delay and stuff. Yes.
exactly. So some of like the ÖVP, the SPÖ, which is you'd argue center right, and NEOS, which is a spin-off of the FPÖ. They decided that they will form a coalition together um, in order to not allow for, I mean, the far right, but actually, if we're more precise, their problem was with Herbert Kickl as an individual, but not with the FPÖ in general, right?
Okay. So why
So
particularly Hubert was a troubling figure for them?
because from the one hand, they argue that it is his rhetoric that is problematic. So they're individualizing the problem of racism and xenophobia in him as a person. But then on the one hand, they are worried about his impact on the on Austria globally. So they were worried that his presence or him being chancellor would isolate Austria in regards to foreign intelligence wanting to work with us, but also they were worried about some closeness to Russia. So that was the main issue about Herbert Kickl, and I don't think that they necessarily have an issue with the Islamophobic rhetoric
Okay.
per se. They might say that, but then when you think about their behavior, it doesn't reflect that because actually that coalition that was created in order to prevent the FPÖ from coming to power, what was the thing that they all agreed upon? The first thing, hijab ban, banning the hijab.
Okay.
All parties agreed on it. And even though they know that every time they try to ban the hijab, the Constitutional Court ended up breaking that ban, they still were like, okay, let's try again. And
Persistent
this,
about it. Okay.
they're very persistent about
And
it, right?
hijab ban is like any public place, or is it about schools? Are they targeting young women, like especially in schools and universities, or are they targeting like any public place?
So this time they were targeting girls who are under the age of 14, and if I'm not mistaken, also teachers.
Okay.
So yeah. These were the two aspects. But you know what is really interesting, and I was thinking about it because I also listened to your podcast with that you did with Ryan, and he was talking about the idea of when you asked him like why is France able to kind of be successful with that kind of with these kind of laws that are, you know, very clearly discriminatory, very clearly racist. And he said that France does not recognize minorities per
Yes.
se. France does not discriminate against people they don't recognize. Now, in Austria, we have the complete opposite, or we have the opposite. Not only do they recognize Muslims, actually, Muslims or Islam is officially recognized by the state. We have our own Islam law, which was um, reformed in 2015, of course, to the worse, and it was even more securitized. But we also have a representative body that is supposed to represent Muslims in Austria. And still, if you think about it, Austria and France are amongst the two most Islamophobic countries in the EU, and
Mm-hmm.
arguably two of the most Islamophobic countries
Denmark as
in
well.
including, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So that idea that a lot of Muslim people kind of think or believe that it is a matter of representation. It is not. And representation is not going to solve the issues, and it's not an issue of us being at the table or having a seat at the discussion table. It is not. Because in Austria, we supposedly have that body that is supposed to represent Muslims and Islam in Austria, but it is co-opted because it's paid for by the state. And at the end of the day, it does what the state wants them to do. If
And
that
how
makes
do you
sense.
tackle that? How do you tackle that? When you say we are not at the table, is it because Muslims are not present in political spaces or yeah, political spaces or activist spaces? Is it because we are there or we're not there?
So I think either whether we are there or whether we are not there, I don't think it's gonna make a big difference. And that is why I'm telling you the example of France and Austria,
Hmm.
where we are recognized by the state, right? We have our own law, we have our own representative body that is actually funded by the state. You'd argue that is,
No,
when it
why
comes.
I'm asking you that question is because if you have a political party that is more lenient towards, let's say, Muslims, they can at least challenge, they can challenge these laws, right? So that is a possibility. So I'm just curious, like, would that be a possible,
To have a political.
viable solution? Yeah, political party that is more lenient towards Muslims. So, for instance, in like, on top of my head, let's say in the UK, you have these independent candidates
Hmm.
that are supported by the people. So if you have these independent candidates or like more Muslim immigrant friendly candidates, not necessarily only on that case, but like of course they have different stances. But do you think that would be a favorable position because they might object to the hijab ban or targeting Muslims in the Senate or Parliament, whatever you have? Do you think that's a
Yeah.
possibility?
I don't think so. I mean, if you think about it, the way the democratic system is built, it's a numbers game,
Yeah.
right? So one politician who is favorable of Muslims is not really going to be able to challenge.
No one. I said a party. I said a whole party. That's why.
I don't even think that we have enough numbers for a political party. If you think about it, we are 10%. That is,
No, it's not Muslims only. That's why I didn't use the word. It's
well,
Muslim party.
if the thing is, right? Um, if the reason why these the reason why the state can actually do something like Operation Luxor and people being silent about it, right? The reason why the state can do hijab ban and people being silent about it is because of the normalization of Islamophobia. It has
Hmm.
become something that is very normal and people accept it and people don't mind it. It's actually something that these parties know that it is a cheap way to win um, uh,
Elections, votes.
election, right? Votes. What is the cheapest way to tell people that we are doing something about these migrants is you put a hijab and it doesn't cost them anything, right? So we are in a situation where that has become completely normal. It is if racism is something that is um, or the fighting racism or racism is an issue that is of importance in a society, then I would argue yes, because people will not give their votes to parties that perpetuate racism, that perpetuate
Because
Islamophobia.
think about it, like you have, I mean, I don't know about Austria, but I know for sure you had massive farmers' protests all over Europe just last
Mhm.
year. And you also had like I think here in Poland you had like 2 years ago during COVID time, you had teachers protesting because I know here for a fact that they hardly pay anything towards teachers.
Yeah,
The NHS, what's happening, and you know about Paris in France,
yeah,
like every other month you have a new protest. So economically, the people are not happy
mm.
and they're not being paid. So do you have like farmers protest and teachers protest that the government is not subsidizing them properly? Do you have these issues, the common people problem in Austria?
And we do, of course we do, but we are not like France. So, and also Belgium. I think Belgium, they also have like a big culture of kind of a protest and stuff, but we don't have that. So yes, we
Okay.
do have issues, but there isn't a big presence of it on the street. And I'd argue that the reason why that is historically the welfare state was able to kind of push down on these oppositional powers, by just um, keeping them close to the state, right? So we don't have that culture where people will go out on the street. They did it with COVID. There was a lot of um, dissatisfaction with the COVID policies and stuff. So it is also one of the reasons why the FPÖ was able to come back from its own death. Because they mobilized on that dissatisfaction and they mobilized on the COVID protest. But it's not I'd argue it's not really part of our culture to have that many protests and stuff.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean,
I mean,
yeah, it's
addressing these issues, farmers'
mm,
issue or teachers' issues. So, don't you think like it's a win-win situation? So Muslims, they don't really have to target Muslims like hijab and silly things. They can focus on, like you said, the budget. Um, where is the money going and stuff? So that would unite a political party that actually thinks and focuses on real things, real issues, rather than hijab and organization bans and stuff.
I mean, ideally, yes.
Ideally, yes.
Ideally, yes, but I guess the route they are more likely going into is accepting and normalizing Islamophobia, scapegoating Muslims,
Hmm.
because that is easier than actually saying who the actual problem is, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, ideally, of course, but that
So
is not.
has there been any closure of mosques or organizations? Like you said, they targeted Rahma, but like they targeted any closure like France or anything. Do you have any closures of organizations?
They did. I think it was under the the dates. I don't remember under which rule it was or what year it was. It was a couple of years ago where they
But
closed
one
down.
or two or more? Like it's
It
frequent.
was systemic. It was systemic. They closed down 7 mosques. And I'll tell you something, and this is where, yeah, the Muslim representation plays its role, right? Not in a
Okay.
positive, but so what used to happen was that, or how the role functions is you need a reason why you close these mosques, right? So basically, I think back then it was terrorism-related accusation that they used against 7 mosques, and they didn't hold in court, so they had to reopen them. And a year ago, there was a mosque that was closed by the state or by the police because they argued that the imam there um, radicalizes people. So again, terrorism
Accusations.
accusations, right? Then the court said we have no evidence to support these claims, and they reopened these mosques. So what did the IGGÖ do? And that was the first time ever the IGGÖ does this, which is the representative body of the Muslims in Austria. They ended up closing that mosque themselves.
Why? Okay, that's strange.
And when that happens, when the IGGÖ are the ones who close, it just goes to show you that having a representative body or someone who represents Muslim is not the solution because they are not really sovereign, they're not really autonomous. They're always tied to the state. They are funded by the state, right?
Yeah,
And that
that
was
makes.
it actually it's actually it signals also a shift, right, in how the IGGÖ is going to do politics and it's going to treat the Muslim community. And the problem is when the IGGÖ are the ones who close down a mosque, um, there is barely anything you can do about it.
What is
No,
IGGÖ exactly again? It's a
it's a
Muslim organization.
yeah, it's a representative body. It's an organization that represents all Muslims,
That
and
is
they are
state funded.
that is state funded and they are responsible for mosques. So you cannot call yourself a mosque unless you have some kind of license from the IGGÖ. And they are
Okay.
also, amongst other things, they also are responsible for Islamic education in Austria. So if you want to argue that the IGGÖ closed down your mosque um, um, illegitimately, no court in Austria will want to intervene because they will say there is an Islam law, you're recognized here, and this is an um, inner Muslim with it yourself. Now, technically, that is an a good position to be in to have like that sovereignty within the state. But if you want to actually challenge this, the body that you challenge it is within the IGGÖ.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like You have to go to the IGGÖ to challenge the IGGÖ,
Understand? Okay.
and that is the only there is nothing else you can do basically about the situation. So yeah,
Inshallah khair.
and they ended
So
up
inshallah. Sorry?
closing, and so they ended up closing their that mosque. They
So
can't
what
pray.
about what about Palestinian protests? Like, did you have any Palestinian protests, countermeasures that stopped you from organizing?
So very early on, they were kind of very hard on repressing Palestine or pro-Palestinian protests. They banned actually many.
Mm-hmm.
And also at some very early on, they were very clear on the usage of some phrases like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. A lot of the organizers of protest were kind of forced to sign a document um, that would where they actually state that they will not use this phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So at the beginning, there were a lot of arrests that happened, a lot of protests that were banned. They tried to criminalize certain phrases and just make it difficult for people to organize, right? Because once someone says this phrase or once someone has a sticker with that phrase on, they will just shut down the whole protest. Yeah, that is one of the or how they would basically
Respond.
respond. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yep. You wanted to say something. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Don't remember.
I didn't remember. Okay, fine. So, how can Muslims tackle? What do you think is a solution for Muslims
Um, you know,
in
um,
Austria?
in Australia. So basically, Cage has actually developed a 10-point plan. I think Ryan, when he went onto your podcast, he actually talked about it as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is a plan that you could argue kind of is divided into a couple of themes. To one point, it talks about the importance of being Muslim and actually staying strong to your own values and virtues, and having tawakkul, but then also about the financial independence of the community, creating not relying on the same institutions that are actually um,
State sponsored.
yeah, that are part of the problem or sponsor our own repression. So we cannot rely on courts that or fully rely on courts that actually are part of the state-sponsored
System.
Islamophobia, or rely on a political party system that fosters Islamophobia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and also other aspects like supporting initiatives and community and groups and people who are doing work and cross-border solidarity, etc., etc. It's a very a good and vast kind of document that you can read and
From CAGE website,
yeah,
cage.ngo website.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
But what I would argue is, I think when I look into our state as Austrian Muslims in Austria, is the first thing that we need to change is our mindset, right? Our role, our understanding of our role as Muslims in Europe. And I feel like we have kind of pushed back into that we need to just preserve our existence. We are in preservation mode, especially since October the 7th,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people were scared. So Operation Luxor happened and it already put so much fear into the community. And then October the 7th happened and we saw that fear that was actually put in the community, how it ended up looking like. So the mindset, and by mindset I mean that we are not just here to preserve our existence, and our existence here, if it doesn't have a meaning, it's we're just people who grow up and make money and have families, and we die. But that is not how we're supposed to
View
live our life.
life. Mhm.
live our lives in Austria, right? So I feel like we have to redefine what it means for us to be Muslims in Austria, what it means for us to go to university if you wish to go to university, what it means for us to educate ourselves, what it means for us to make money, what are we supposed to do with that money, right? To kind of break free from the shackles of the integration debate and how a Muslim is supposed to look like, and you're not supposed to be amongst your own people because otherwise you're building parallel societies. No, we need to build societies and independent institutions that are financially independent, that are
Mhm.
also in their thinking independent of that form of state repression. So, and that goal will only reach when every one of us starts his life in the West with that mindset, with that
Mhm.
thinking. Everything I do is
But
because I'm
as a collective,
a
as a
collective. I have to
collective.
think of a bigger project that is bigger than me and my own preservation and my own projects, and not trying to lose what I've
And this is for general public, like everyone should have it. Like whether you're doing political activities or activist stuff, or even if you're working, like this is a very important initiative for everyone. Like what you mentioned, those steps, tawakkul and focus in life, recalibrating our worldview. I think it's for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And just
So, mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, please continue.
I was just saying it's just hold on your deen and on your values, right? Because if we are Muslims and we want to believe that Islam is the one true religion and we believe that Islam is the truth, then that is our test, right? Like
Yes.
if you're gonna hold on to these values, because what are they trying to do with political Islam? What are they trying to do with the whole debate around terrorism? They're trying to deform what Islam actually is. So it is our role here to hold on to it even further. And if we believe in that Allah will never do anything that is harmful, then we will know that holding on to our religion will make us inherently more successful, right?
Hmm.
So it's not going to make us poorer, or it's not gonna um, steer us away from specific resources, etc. So I do think that the idea of the mindset and of the role that Islam plays
Hmm.
um, within our lives.
Individual, yes. Islam should
Individual.
be shaped like it's uh that your worldview should be through Islam. That's true.
Yeah.
Do you have any? Okay, let me come back to that question. We have like about 5 minutes. What
Mhm.
inspired you to join? I mean, you're first generation. You grew up in Austria. So,
Yeah.
what inspired you to the activist role and join Cage? And beyond that,
Hmm.
be a challenging to the institution establishment rather.
Interesting question. I think what inspired me, I must say, is not really living in Austria. I actually lived a couple of years in Egypt,
Okay.
and it's being in a society where you see injustice in front of you so clearly is what actually kind of brought that idea of injustice and having to do something against injustice and being vocal and political started from. So I'd argue that it started from the couple of years that I've lived in Egypt, and I was quite a political person in Egypt. It was during the Mubarak era. I was quite young still.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved back to Austria, I went to university and I actually got into the Muslim Youth of Austria, where I also learned a lot of important lessons about having or wanting to do something for Islam in Austria, wanting to do something for a bigger collective in Austria. And that was something that has always been on my mind. And it's one of the du'as that I always used to say is, in Arabic, it's Allahumma istakhdimni wa la tastabdilni. In English, it'd be translated into something like, oh Allah, please use me and don't change me out, or something like that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know the right translation. So that like growing up or being or having the ability to feel like you're in a collective, and then also that sense of understanding what injustice is and the necessity to fight against it. But I'd also say the Arab Spring was one of the factors that played into it.
I'm
And
asking
then,
you this question particularly because I'm sure you're very young. You look young, definitely. So
I
as an
look young, I'm
inspiration.
not very young.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I thought like I would maybe I mean you said you started very early from Egypt itself, so probably it's an inspiration for the younger generation to
Yeah,
take you as an
yeah, yeah,
inspiration.
100%, 100%. I think you can do, you can do. Like, the thing is, we always think that it's very, very difficult. But even if you think about how we became Cage Austria, it wasn't like we were just a group of people who saw an injustice happening. They saw that there is no one else really doing much about it, and they started to act,
Yeah.
right? And that is basically it. That is basically it. That is basically how everything starts. A group of people come together and they decide
At the
to
heat of
act
the moment, yeah.
at, at the heat of the moment, or you see a vacuum, you see a necessity, and you start to organize a network around it. It's not, it's really not difficult, right?
Yeah.
So it's just you need to have a plan, you need to have a strategy, and consult people who've been doing this work. I mean, we were very, very lucky that at that time my colleague was working at Cage, and Cage was very generous with their knowledge and their resources, and they helped us a lot into understanding what is happening, that there is a bigger system around it, and how to tackle it, and how
Hmm.
to centralize the survivors into how we tackle Islamophobia. So, and I know that in every community we'll find these types of people who are willing to give their knowledge and their expertise and to the younger people or to a new group of people. So, or you can just start something on your own. And I'll give you a very small example.
We have
If
one
you're,
minute. If you can make it in 1 minute, yeah.
it's just like, for instance, if you go to school, see who the other Muslim people are and pray together. That is
Mhm.
one act of collective, something collective that you do. And if you have that mindset, then you will find ways, and Allah will open ways for you to help and do something.
Jazakallah khair. We'll hope to be in touch and thank you very much, by the way.